With the recent release of 2.5 and the acclaim of the Phrolova story, you probably know that I've been going back and looking at a lot of the old Rinascita characters to essentially analyze and look back at its stories. When it comes to Ciaccona, Ciaccona is a character whose story I thought was excellently done even the first time I played it. However, now that we've actually gotten the Phrolova story in 2.5, I've actually been quite amazed looking back at Ciaccona's story in 2.3, because based on what I've found, I think that Kuro is definitely planning ahead to make this sort of secret part of Ciaccona's story basically just absolute cinema. So for those of you who need a hook to keep on watching, and I understand of course, what I've realized after study is that Ciaccona's character all the way back in 2.3 was actually already foreshadowing Phrolova's character and story in 2.5. I think that in this video, I can prove essentially beyond reasonable doubt that Ciaccona and Phrolova's characters are actually inextricably linked. They are essentially two sides of the same coin. And this is a very, very intentional choice and design by Kuro, especially considering that Phrolova and Ciaccona are linked very heavily through aspects such as art, music, and even their own life and experiences. So I'm already guessing that this video is going to go on for a rather long time. There's a lot of things I want to talk about. So without any further ado, let's get started. As always, I'll put the glossary on the next screen, and spoilers ahead. With such a unique name, it's quite expected that Ciaccona's name itself has a lot of symbolism behind it. After my mistake of failing to recognize the significance of a character's name in my brand video, which I deeply regret, I'm inclined, essentially, not to make the same mistake. Ciaccona's name is Italian for the ciaccone, which is a type of musical composition made especially famous by Johann Bach in his composition Partita for solo violin 2. Being meant to be played on the violin, you can probably tell that this is totally not foreshadowing for anything. It is made up of 5 moments, or chapters essentially, with the final one, the ciaccona, being the longest of the 5. Bach's piece also functions on a repeated structure, which people have interpreted across time as symbolizing a sort of eternity and immortality of the human spirit. And all of this, I promise, will become more and more clear as we continue the analysis, so please just hold on to your horses for a little. Similar to what Ciaccona is trying to do through music, Bach's piece, in which she is named after, has been said to be able to communicate, in the words of Johannes Brahms, a whole world of the deepest thoughts and most powerful feelings. Ciaccona herself, as the wandering bard that celebrates, rather than laments the legacy of the dead, says it herself best.
The true purpose of music is to express what words cannot. Rover, if there's something you want to say but can't put into words, if you sing it, maybe I'll understand.
Personally, I did not think I would be finding my favorite piece of Wuthering Waves symbolism to date in Ciaccona's story of all places, but I think that Clare Harner's poem Immortality and how it links to Phrolova really just takes the cake. So, to begin with, I think it is best to first introduce the poem Immortality by Clare Harner before we talk about either Ciaccona or Phrolova. It's a poem that essentially talks about how people, even after physically dying, can live on through the thoughts and memories of those who are still living, basically gaining a sort of immortality in a sense. And you might be asking right now, wait, I thought I was watching a video analyzing Ciaccona, not Phrolova. And you'd be right, because this is where it gets interesting, because it's not just Phrolova, but both of these characters that are connected to this poem. If you check the description of Frolova's signature weapon, the Lethean Elegy, you can find it says the following: I am not there, I do not die. I shall be death's companion. With euphoric delights I drown my fear. With the coming days I trade for the past. As some people in the community have already found out, Frolova's weapon description is an interpretation of Harner's poem Immortality, where she says in the first few lines, I am not there, I do not sleep, before continuing the poem to talk about her immortal state after death. However, what a lot of people missed in 2.3 and actually don't know is that, similar to how Frolova's Symbolism makes an interpretation of Harner's poem, Ciaccona's story also has an interpretation of its own. In fact, it's actually even more complete and stays more true to the original poem by Harner. So let's look quickly at the cutscene where Ciaccona actually sings her version of this poem.
Do not place flowers on my tomb, for I do not rest beneath the stone. I am the sea wind at Raguna's walls. I am a dawn that breaks through thorns. I am a nighthawk of wings of flame, soaring towards the celestial steed, whose praises I sing and whose true form I behold.
In this, we can see, if we place the two versions of the poem side by side, Ciaccona's version is very clearly also an interpretation of Clare Harner's original. For instance, instead of saying she is the thousand winds that blow, Ciaccona says that she is a sea wind at Raguna's walls. Instead of the diamond that glints in snow, she is a dawn that breaks through thorns. And as we can see, it's pretty obvious that even before Frolova's weapon and story was released in 2.5, Ciaccona actually already adapted the poem in 2.3, very clearly foreshadowing the different approaches to death that she and Phrolova have. And the major question that just left at the end of this is, why? Why do Phrolova and Ciaccona have different interpretations of the exact same poem? The answer, quite simply, is that Phrolova and Ciaccona are one and the same. They are two sides of the same coin of tragedy. They are both musicians who have been marred by loss. However, while Phrolova uses music to lament misery and death, Ciaccona uses her music to honor the legacy of those who have fallen. While Phrolova channels her efforts to a futile attempt to reverse the passage of death, using her present days and future to trade for the past, Ciaccona accepts it, using music to eternalize stories rather than reverse loss. While Phrolova's moveset marks the beginning and the unfinished state of life in purgatory, with her symbolism of the Italian overture, which we covered in our previous video, Ciaccona provides a dead finality, with the Ciaccona being the final chapter of a musical composition. You can even see that, for instance, Phrolova is a DPS character who tries to brute force past the boundary of death, while Ciaccona is a support character who accepts death and honors the fallen through song, supporting the truth and spreading it to anyone who will listen. They may have come from different places, but their present selves could not be more different. But, that's all just from one poem. You might be thinking, quite understandably, that, that's cool and all, but in the end, it's just one poem that happened to have a reference that may be coincidental. You can't just prove Ciaccona and Phrolova are linked based off only one symbolic reference, right? And that's why we now have to move on to perhaps the main moment of this orchestra, Ciaccona's musical symbolism, and how it mirrors Phrolova's.
Let us play the song of hope and witness the sunrise once more. We reborn from the ashes of tragedy.
To preface this section, I heavily recommend you to watch my video on Phrolova's cruel symbolism for the greatest understanding, or at least a section on her musical symbolism to really understand this part. Because not only do I introduce a lot of musical terminology in that video, but it's also really valuable to understanding how Ciaccona and Phrolova are truly opposites of each other in nearly every sense of the word. To begin, let's just quickly rehash on Phrolova's moveset generally. Symbolically speaking, the names and animations of all of Phrolova's moves suggest that it is the beginning of a composition, or essentially that of an Italian overture, with her outro skill, called Unfinished Piece, basically confirming this theory of being unfinished. On the other hand, as we have said already, Bach's Partita for Violin No. 2, which is written for violin solos, is also a bit of homage to Phrolova. It contains a Ciaccona as a final, decisive composition. Essentially, what I'm trying to say here is that while Phrolova's music symbolically alludes to an unfinished beginning, Ciaccona's is one of a final and complete end. While Phrolova is unable to accept the process of death and leaves her composition and promise to rover unfinished, Ciaccona accepts its true nature and chooses to honor the passing of those who have sacrificed themselves in art and song. This is something which is pushed further by the name of Ciaccona's resonance chain, number 4, called toccata and fugue. Toccata is not only a reference to Ciaccona's family name, but also to another one of Bach's compositions called Toccata and Fugue in D minor. A toccata, which is Italian for to touch, is an improvisational and free-form piece, while a fugue, which is Italian for to chase or to flee, is alternately a complex and layered piece. We can see through this sort of analogy that while the toccata symbolically represents Ciaccona, who has accepted the nature of death and chooses to embrace and be free, the fugue is iconic of Phrolova, who has continued to endlessly flee from the truth of death, composing the complex Lost Beyond in order to try and reverse the impossible. Other parts of Ciaccona's kit also gives us some insights into their relationship with Phrolova. For instance, her Resonance Liberation Singer's Triple Cadenza is an improvised solo piece right before the end of a song, which matches perfectly with what we already talked about with both the symbolism behind the Ciaccona and the toccata, which coincidentally, of course, very coincidentally, forms her full name, Ciaccona Toccata. Additionally, her basic attack, Quadruple Time Steps, is symbolic of a composition made up of 4 movements, which was very popular in the classical and Baroque period with composers like Beethoven, while Phrolova's Italian overture, inspired by a basic attack such as Movement of Life and Death, is made up of only 3 movements. And this may be a bit of my own headcanon, I suppose. It's a bit of pure speculation on my part, so take this following section with a grain of salt. But my personal theory for why this is different, why Phrolova's entire moveset symbolizes 3 movements while Ciaccona symbolizes 4, is we have to again go back to Bach's Partita for Violin No. 2, which we talked about at the very beginning. In that series of compositions, even though the Ciaccona is the 4th and final part, it is actually the longest component, being about the same length as all other 3 parts combined. In essence, by mirroring the state of Phrolova's unfinished piece, Ciaccona's attacks and symbolism, which bank on the number 4 instead of 3, basically kind of infers that Ciaccona herself has reconciled with death, with the end essentially, and she herself is effectively complete, which is why the Ciaccona is the last piece. This is something which is further reinforced by the fact that Phrolova's forte circuit is called a Rhapsody of a New World, which indicates a sort of wild and inconsistent performance, with her combat reflecting that. Her rotation does not need to be done in any particular order, and you can reach her ultimate with any combination of notes. Meanwhile, Ciaccona's forte circuit is called Symphony of Wind and Verse, which symbolizes an organized and complete musical work made up of 4 movements. As you can probably guess, Ciaccona's rotation is much more strict and ordered compared to Phrolova's that doesn't need any order whatsoever. And in essence, this reflects the duality of these 2 characters. While one walks through life haphazardly feeling unfinished, the other has already come to terms with the end, with the past, and has already completed her symphony. Additionally, Ciaccona's first resonance chain, called Where Wind Sings, is potentially a reference to the Japanese novel Kaze no Ota wo Kike, or Hear the Wind Sing, by Haruki Murakami, which deals with themes of loss and social alienation, which is a perfect parallel to Ciaccona's past, looking at all those that have come before her be sentenced to pilgrim's sail, with only her surviving to continue the legacy of truth that they left behind. Her second resonance chain, Song of 4 Seasons, is a reference to Vivaldi's concerto, The 4 Seasons, made up of, again, 4 movements that denote the passing of the seasons, with a very heavy emphasis in the first 2 sections on how music is carried along the wind, which is, as you can probably guess, a very big part of Ciaccona's story. Additionally, Vivaldi also published this alongside sonnets that accompanied his music, which is perfect for Ciaccona, as she is not only a musician, but also a poet. Her 5th resonance chain, Eternal Idol to Lasting Summer, is what I think is very likely a reference to Shakespeare's Sonnet 18, which is one of his most famous sonnets ever. In this sonnet, Shakespeare essentially says that art can capture beauty eternally, which is exactly what Ciaccona's approach to death and loss essentially is. Beginning with the famous rhetorical, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" Shakespeare essentially says that something temporary, whether that is a summer's day or life itself, can be kept immortal through art. So as long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Ciaccona repeats this very famous line through her own memory, saying that, "As long as you still draw breath, lift your eyes and look. With this poem, your life is eternal." Unlike Phrolova, who keeps chasing the vain dream of making the temporary state of a village last forever, Ciaccona seeks to use art to make human life truly eternal. To make sure thy eternal summer shall not fade.
It is time, sinner against the sentinel.
But you,
I will continue to sing.
as long as there are those who breathe and see.
My eternal summer will never fade.
As a final point for music, I want to say that many of the musical references that I just covered in this section are actually also very much linked to the Baroque period of music. For instance, Vivaldi's 4 Seasons, Bach's Toccata and Fugue, as well as the Partita for Violin No. 2, among a lot of others, are all framed around the period of the Baroque. In fact, the very concept of the Ciaccona, or the Ciaccon itself, which Ciaccona is named after, is also a very intensely Baroque concept. This is rather important to mention to just finish off this section, as Baroque music was focused on feelings, on nature, and on beauty, with it being one of the very first musical periods that puts a very heavy emphasis on harmony with the continuous bass and sounds that is often a trend of Baroque pieces. You can see this even with the appearance of Ciaccona's forte circuit in gameplay compared to Phrolova, which is much more disorganized and haphazard. Unlike Phrolova, who composes incomplete elegies and rhapsodies, symbolic of a goal of reversing death to create an unfinished purgatory, Ciaccona's link to Baroque music makes her style more positive and complete, celebrating the beauty of what her predecessors did in life rather than lamenting the tragedy of their deaths. Now that we've extensively compared Ciaccona and Phrolova, we can move on to investigating Ciaccona and her story from a lot more of a focused and individual perspective. One of the most striking pieces of symbolism I found immediately happens when you and Ciaccona first go to the grave of instruments, and she begins talking about knowledge and inspiration. Besides the crazy fact that Ciaccona literally grows a fucking apple out of her head, which is pretty funny, and also pretty convenient if you're hungry. This is a very clear reference to the tree of knowledge of good and evil from the book of Genesis, which most of you will know as a tree in the Garden of Eden. In the original biblical story, Eve eats the apple from a tree, gaining knowledge of good and evil, but also leading to them being banished from paradise. This links, of course, with the Order of the Deep in Renacita, who look to banish those who try to spread the truth of the true appearance of the Sentinel, labeling those who do so as heretics, and banishing them from Ragusa, which they can see as a sort of paradise, to eventually ride the pilgrim sail to their deaths. However, as we already covered in the Brand video, which I recommend watching if you want to go especially on an extensive analysis journey on the Order of the Deep, we can see that the Order themselves are hypocrites. They are as much fools themselves as those they accuse of being fools. In this, we can interpret Eve's act of eating the apple as not an act of sin, but one where she exercises free will and gains knowledge to see past the illusions presented by Renacita's corrupt religion. As Ciaccona offers you the apple, asking you to take a bite and wanting for you to become partners in crime, Ciaccona serves the role as a tree of knowledge itself. In this way, Ciaccona has a similar purpose to Brant in wanting to expose the truth about the Order, but she uses music and song to do so, performing in front of the cathedral in her story quest, to spread the truth of the Sentinel to anyone who will listen, to anyone who is willing to take a bite of the apple of knowledge. As you and Ciaccona escape and finish the story quest on a hill overlooking the city, the scene that greets us is similar to many depictions of the Garden of Eden itself. Ciaccona says that you, like Adam and Eve, are now partners in crime, with an apple falling right before her story quest finishing, symbolizing that Ciaccona has fulfilled her duty, a duty to all those that try to speak the truth before her. While she has not caused the collapse of the Order, she has caused an apple to fall, planting the seeds of doubt that will one day blossom into the truth.
I am the gentle sea breeze, sweeping through Wistfulwind Haven and towards Ragusa's high walls.
One of the more important aspects of symbolism that I missed when I was analysing Brant is the reference to a movie called The Dead Poets Society. At the end of Brant's quest, there's an achievement you can earn called "Oh Captain, My Captain," which shows the crewmates of the Fool's Troop standing up on chairs similar to a real scene within the movie. Considering that Kuro has a tendency to reuse references across stories, such as what they did with Shakespeare's The Tempest, Dante's Divine Comedy, among others, it is not surprising that they also chose to reuse the frame of the Dead Poets Society to represent the three cantors of the Golden Anthem. In the original movie, an English teacher called Miss Keating and the class decide to revive a secret poet society similar to the Golden Anthem. The class and the Poetry Society motivate and positively affects all of its members. However, the society eventually breaks apart, with some dissenting elements within the club itself outing the ringleader, the teacher Miss Keating himself, similar to how the other two members of the Golden Anthem begin to express their doubts to Farrell. Despite this, however, in the end, the three of the Golden Anthem choose to face their deaths together in face of the truth, mirroring the "Oh Captain, my Captain" scene within the film, as they express his support even though Keating is fired from his position. In talking about secret poetry societies and relations to Bran's story with expressing the truth of the order, one more thing that immediately came to mind for me was the Romanticist Lake Poets. The Lake Poets were a group of Romanticist poets who all lived in the Lake District in England, writing mostly poems about Romanticism, about the beauty of nature, of valuing emotion over logic, as well as also prioritizing individual experiences, which, if you guys watch my Brand video, are all basically key Romanticist values. However, one thing that I didn't cover in my Brand video is that one of the other aspects of Romanticist poetry is that it was one of the first literary movements in the English language that particularly focused on the experiences of not only powerful and grand people, but also the plight and the everyday lives of ordinary, even lower class people. This is really important, as one of the main shifts in plot in the story of the Golden Anthem was when a knight called them hypocrites for not telling the stories of ordinary people, which leads the three cantors to go to Whisperwind Haven to investigate for themselves, where they find the lithograph of the true sentinel. From this stage, the Golden Anthem as a secret poetry society truly forms, writing songs not only for the Order, but for the ordinary people of Ragusa. Not only do the Lake Poets, which you basically can't know at least one of if you study Romanticism, mirror the secret poets society of the Golden Anthem, but their pursuit of serving the common people instead of just the whims of what the Order of the Deep demands them is strikingly parallel. In the end, Ciaccona follows the sacrifice and legacy of those that came before her. Similar to Romanticist poets who emphasize the beauty of nature and the power of wind to carry their words, even into the decrepit and hopeless cities plunged in the midst of the Industrial Revolution, Ciaccona herself hopes that she can fulfill the role of the wandering bard, carrying her stories and truth to the people of Rinascita.
Well, have you decided on your answer? I look forward to the public trial.
Perhaps our fates are not so different after all.
It is time, sinner against the sentinel.
The legend of Icarus is not only one of the most famous classical legends in history, but also one that Ciaccona herself mentions in the same scene when you visit the graveyard of musical instruments, as she says here.
Is that so? But I'm nowhere near as dazzling as the sun. If anything, I'd rather be like Icarus in the story, soaring freely in the sky, even if it means falling in the end.
The story of Icarus, if you don't know already, is a story of Icarus, who was given a set of wings by his father. Having been warned not to fly too low to ground lest the wings get wet, and not to fly too high lest the wax of the wings melt, Icarus ignored his father's warnings and chooses to fly higher and higher upwards, proud of even being able to fly in the first place. Expectedly, however, his wings are burned and he plummets to earth, dying after having seen the beauty that is the sun. This legend, of course, is a parallel to Golden Anthem and Ciaccona's story, who choose to chase the truth and beauty, no matter how much suffering it may bring them in the end. When Ciaccona finally tells the true side of the Golden Anthem story, we can see how they, like Icarus, choose to burn themselves in order to chase the beauty of truth one final time. In honoring their sacrifice, Ciaccona sees herself as following the legacy of the Golden Anthem, comparing herself directly to Icarus, as she says, soaring freely in the sky, even if it means falling in the end. This is especially important because right before Ciaccona's final performance as part of her story quest, Cristoforo actually talks to her and discusses the legend of Icarus using the dilemma of a caged bird. It is as follows.
A group of birds locked inside a cage. Convinced they will never fly, they do nothing but stand on a perch. Then, one day, the cage door opened. The young birds flapped their fragile wings attempting to fly, but plummeted to the ground, one by one. Many consider their fate a tragic one. What say you?
I see it differently. Even if they met their end falling into the abyss, they still had a chance to glimpse the sky and spread their wings.
And what of those who chose to remain in the cage, having witnessed their predecessors fall to their demise? Will they dare to reach for the skies after realizing the cost of choosing to fly? Does the truth exist to protect or to harm? That is the question.
In Ciaccona's eyes, the chance of flying, of freedom, no matter how fleeting, is worth the eventual cost. Simply put, Ciaccona believes that there is no price you can put on freedom. In this, we see that she honors and respects not only the legacy of the poets that came before her, but also the price they paid in order to speak the truth. Though the sacrifice of those close to her is something that weighs heavily on her mind, Ciaccona, quite unlike Phrolova, has reconciled their deaths as sacrifice, not as tragic accidents that should be reversed, but as purposeful decisions that should be eternally honored.
The only thing I can offer is to immortalize this moment. I will carry all the stories about you with me.
During Ciaccona's story, when she as a child is reading the forbidden books in her father's study about the Golden Anthem, she mentions the first two lines of one of the most famous poems in history, which is aptly named the same as its famous line, as she says in her third character story, The Fate and the Door. Her father had forbidden anyone from entering this room. He told her it was his abandoned study, one he never had the time to clean out. He warned that the floorboards were so rotten they might break underfoot. But this wasn't enough to deter young Ciaccona's curiosity. Just as she had read in a poetry book, do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Written by Dylan Thomas after having been struck by inspiration after visiting Florence, which, yes, was probably the center of the Italian Renaissance, if we didn't have enough references to that already, of course. The poem was written to his dying father, similar to how Ciaccona's father, in the same scene, passes on the responsibility of safeguarding the Golden Anthem to his daughter. As such, the poem has been interpreted as to having courage and not letting up even on the threshold of death. This is a rather intense parallel to the fate of the Golden Anthem themselves, who decide to write poetry and songs while burning their pilgrim sail, making one final fierce show before they are consumed by the flames. As Thomas says in his poem, the three cantors of the Golden Anthem chose to rage against the dying of the light, as they themselves declare that their bodies will fuel the flames that light the way to truth. As Thomas also says, they are wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight, referencing not only the previous legend of Icarus, but also the inferno itself that they intentionally light on their ship. Like the phoenix who resurrects itself through the caress of fire, the Golden Anthem's search for truth has been immortalized through their art, with Ciaccona carrying on their legacy and sacrifice to, in Thomas's own words, blaze like meteors in an eternal future. Similar to Clare Harner's poem, which we've already discussed, Thomas's poem also relates to Phrolova, with both poems beginning with a very iconic "do not," being nearly only also identified by their famous first lines. Compared to Frolova's view of eternal purgatory, where she never wants to truly confront and accept death, Ciaccona faces it wholeheartedly, facing it with bravery and fierceness. Like the caged bird that Cristoforo mentions in his analogy of the Golden Anthem, Ciaccona wills that even if the birds are doomed to fall, the chance of freedom, of being able to spread their wings to see the truth in the world, is not a waste of life, but more than worth the price of death.
Follow your heart. I'll be with you till the end.
As always, thanks very much for watching. If you've reached the end, I'm very thankful, as always, that you reached all this way. And hopefully you've learned something, because when I was researching this, I definitely did. It almost feels like Ciaccona's story has been kept almost halfway complete until Frolova's 2.5 release. And after that, we've really been able to get the maximum symbolic value out of each of these two musically focused characters. One that tries in a vain attempt to halt the march of death, while the other embraces it, making the legacy of people's lives eternal through the medium of music and art. It is a truly fascinating comparison, truly fascinating dichotomy. And as always, thank you very much for watching the video, and I will see you guys next time, hopefully in Septimont.
Divinity, can you hear the poems I recite and the songs I sing?